Hello, friends. We are going through an epidemic that we are trying to learn how to deal with, and we are taking measures not to continue to spread the virus. But I wanted to share some thoughts about a different epidemic that is going on in the world right now, and we may not be aware of. So let us start with a quote by Madame Blavatsky about this. She says, "There are times of epidemic in moral and physical affairs. In one epoch, the spirit of religious controversy will arouse the most ferocious passions of which human nature is susceptible, provoking mutual persecution, bloodshed, and wars. At another time, an epidemic of resistance to constituted authority will spread over half the world, rapid and simultaneous as the most virulent bodily disorder." So she's saying that there are not only physical epidemics, but there are also moral, mental, emotional epidemics. And she says that we can identify these epidemics by the fact that they spread around the country or around the world, and they tend to produce the same kind of actions all around the particular area that is affected. There have been studies in different universities showing that in the last couple of decades, we have lost the ability to talk to those who think differently, to relate to the other side, to understand other points of view. We are right now in a polarization where both sides are suspicious of the other. They think that the other side is immoral or that is evil. And both sides think the same of each other. This is something that is not only happening in the US, but also in many countries around the world. And I would say that this is an epidemic. And this is something that we begin to see the signs of this in everyday life. And at this point, for example, with all the unrest that is going on right now, this is an effect of the epidemic, the moral epidemic. So let's see about this a little more in depth. Annie Besant says, when men generate a large number of malignant thought forms of a destructive character, and these congregate in huge masses on the astral plane, their energy is precipitated on the physical plane, stirring up wars, revolutions, and social disturbances and upheavals of every kind, falling as collective karma on their progenitors and affecting widespread ruin. Epidemics of crime and disease, cycles of accidents have a similar explanation. So you see, when Krishnamurti says, "You are the world," there is what we could call an esoteric reason behind this. Because according to what Annie Besant is explaining, all these wars, revolutions, the social disturbances, upheavals, all of these are effects of the kind of thoughts, the private thoughts and feelings that we have. We think that thoughts and feelings happen only within ourselves, nobody knows about them, and they don't really matter as long as we don't act those thoughts out. But that is not the whole truth. That is an idea that is based only on what the senses show us. This is an exoteric view, an external view of reality. When we start looking into other aspects of reality that are beyond our senses, we can see that thoughts are not private. They actually have an effect in not only in my immediate environment, but in the world as a whole. So how is it possible that thoughts may have an effect? One of Blavatsky's teachers, Mahatma K.H., said, "Every thought passes into the inner world and becomes an active entity by associating itself with an elemental, that is, with one of the semi-intelligent forces of the kingdoms of nature. So let me just briefly say, the idea of elementals in Theosophy is that there are invisible forces which have some kind of intelligence, as the master says, is semi-intelligent. It has some kind of consciousness, but a very primary consciousness. That's why it is called elemental. It has an elemental consciousness. And these forces of nature can use our thoughts as a vehicle of expression. Every time we think, as we are going to see in this quote, we generate a form that can be ensouled by an elemental. And now that thought becomes a kind of entity. This is what the Mahatma will continue to explain. So he says that that thought connected to this semi-intelligent force survives as an active intelligence, a creature of the mind's begetting, for a longer or shorter period proportionate with the original intensity of the cerebral action which generated it. So when the thought form that we produce on the inner planes is ensouled by an elemental, then it survives as an active intelligence, as a kind of creature. And he continues, thus a good thought is perpetuated as an active, beneficent power, an evil one as a maleficent demon. And so man is continually peopling his current in space with a world of his own, crowded with the offspring of his fancies, desires, impulses, and passions. A current which reacts upon any sensitive or nervous organization which comes in contact with it in proportion to its dynamic intensity. So we generate with our thoughts, which associate themselves with these elemental forces, we create either an angel or a demon, to put it simple, because that kind of creature that we generate will, as we are going to see, will tend to influence people in the same direction of the original thought. So we will see this more in details. But the idea is that those thoughts not only go out and affect others, they stay around us and they create an aura around us and they affect us too. So as we generate thoughts, those thoughts hang around us and then they come back to us in the form of thoughts that they are trying to make us think along the same lines. So if we had negative thoughts, those thoughts will come back to us so that we start thinking about those negative things again. Or if we have positive thoughts, those thoughts also will come back trying to stimulate us to continue to think about that. How long these thought forms remain active, it depends on the intensity by which they were produced. So Blavatsky says, if you keep this in mind, you can therefore see that you may be responsible for many more dreadful pictures than you had supposed. For actions of a simple outward appearance have behind them very often the worst thoughts or desires. If men saw the dreadful pictures imprinted in the astral world, which is constantly throwing down upon us their suggestions to repeat the same acts or thoughts, a millennium or a new era might soon draw near. So this is something that we need to be aware. We need to be aware that behind all our actions, when we perform an action, even if that action externally is polite, what we are actually feeling, our desires or our intentions, whether there is compassion or there is a intolerance or whatever is there, is actually also speaking, is acting, is producing something that will stay on the astral plane, as Blavatsky says here, and then from there, it will come back to us and to other people to try to stimulate us to think in the same way. This is the reason why in the Theosophical tradition, there is a strong emphasis on a purification, a maturation of our consciousness, a deepening of our understanding, so that little by little, we can learn how not to engage with negative thoughts. Regular people only know about repression or expression of thoughts. Theosophical literature has many tools to help us deal with our thoughts and emotions and reactions in a way that gradually we purify our nature, we learn how not to engage with them, so that we reduce the amount of negative thoughts and emotions that we are putting out there. Now, Leadbeater says, a man who is so foolish as to allow himself to think of another with hatred or envy radiates a wave tending to provoke similar passions in others. And though his feeling of hatred be for someone quite unknown to these others, and so it is impossible that they should share it, yet the radiation will stir in them an emotion of the same nature towards a totally different person. This is why the epidemic of the moral, mental, emotional epidemics that we are talking about behave in a similar way as the physical epidemics, because thoughts are contagious. So today in this world that is so polarized, people on both sides believe their duty to hate the other side. Let's use the word hate in a philosophical sense. There are, from the theosophical point of view, there are a set of feelings that belong to the side of hate, a set of feelings that belong to the side of love. Now, these feelings may be very close to destructive hate or not so close, but still belonging to the same group. So anything that tends to separate, to destroy, that belongs to the side of hate. And of course, anything that tends to build, to bring together, belong to the side of love. So feelings of intolerance, of anger, of denunciation, criticism, they are all hate feelings. Feelings of, communion, compassion, etc., they are all love feelings. So when a person may have a feeling, let's say a hate feeling against somebody or a group of people who are doing something wrong, that hatred, let's call it hatred, that is being produced to some, it may be very strong and violent or subtler, but that feeling that is within that person goes straight to feed into the people that he or she hates. And the opposite is true. So when the other side is hating what you do, their hate is coming to you and is trying to make you hate. So there is this loop in which we are feeding each other when we engage in any feelings, in positive or negative feelings. We are hating each other and we are feeding each other. So when you see actions, negative actions, wrong actions, at least in your view, that the other side is doing, think that part of that action may be yours. You may have added to the action of the other side. Now, this is not to produce a sense of guilt or anything like that. In the theosophical view, guilt is a useless feeling and is a self-centered feeling. The idea here is to realize that the world is far more complex than we normally think, and that we do have a responsibility not only in what we do, but also in what we feel and think. Now, we won't be able to stop all negative feelings and thought all of a sudden. What we need is to start reducing the amount of thoughts, negative thoughts and negative feelings. There are many ways to do this. We can stop engaging in situations that make us generate those feelings, or engage in a different way, or be trying to be more aware and making an effort to remain calm and centered. Because when we don't, we are, as I was explaining, feeding that which we hate. Actually, there is something also that is even perhaps more surprising that Blavatsky explains. She says, every time you harshly and unmercifully criticize the faults of another, you produce an attraction to yourself of certain quantities of elementals from that person. Remember, we talked about these elementals as forces. We attract certain forces with what we feel and thoughts. So we may have, let us call it, many elementals of intolerance. Now, as Blavatsky says, when we harshly and unmercifully criticize the intolerance in the other person, immediately we start attracting to ourselves those elementals of intolerance, for example. It's not that we cannot look into a situation and recognize or examine a situation like we are doing right now. We are trying to examine situations. It's not that we need to look the other way. But when we cannot do that from a point of equanimity, when we harshly and unmercifully, we gloat in criticizing the other, then we establish a connection. Hate and love connects us, and both hate and love make us become what we hate or become what we love. It is relatively easy to understand how we may become what we love, but this is the esoteric foundation for why we become what we hate. Blavatsky continues, these elementals fasten themselves upon you and endeavor to find in you a similar state or spot or fault that they have left in the other person. It is as if they left the other person to serve you at higher wages, so to say. So the more we hate something, the more we become that which we hate, in one way or the other. You can see this in social movements or political parties. You know, many times you see throughout the decades, these very curious shifts in which a party was supporting something and fighting against something else. And then after a few decades, the roles are inverted. And then the one party became what they hated in the other party, for example. And this happens also with people, with organizations. Whenever we engage in fighting the evil that we see in others by means of hatred, intolerance, etc., inevitably, in one way or the other, we will end up becoming that evil. So Leadbeater says, it is distinctly undesirable that a man should remain always among one set of people and hear only one set of views. It is eminently necessary that he should know something of the other sets, for only in that way can he learn to see good in all. Only thoroughly understanding both sides of any case can he form an opinion that has any right to be called a real judgment. You see, this polarization that we are experiencing is very pernicious, it's very dangerous. It's easy to hate the other when we stop having any connection to the other, when we demonize the other. And as I was saying, both sides are doing exactly the same. It's not because you are in one side and you think that the others are immoral, are wrong, are stupid, whatever we may say. Well, the other side is thinking that of you. And this is a problem with the bubbles of information that we have created. In the last few decades, we have created TV, news channels, or in social media, we receive only the news that we want to receive, perhaps because of this financial incentive to have an audience that you can retain, then many different systems have been generated to feed you what you want to be fed. But the problem with these bubbles of information is that we are increasing the polarization and the inability to see anything good in the others and the hate that comes with that. And all this is what is producing this moral, mental, emotional epidemic that is sweeping across the world. Leadbeater says we should be able to see things as they are. Everybody, most people, we can think of extremes, but most people have good aspects and bad aspects. Most opinions have some value in them and some flaws. And we need to be able to recognize, to see the whole, because only by seeing the whole we can come to true solutions. This is difficult to do for most people for many reasons. One of the reasons is that anger wants to paint everything with a single color. So if I start recognizing, okay, I can see that point in the other person, or I can see how that other person is helping in this way. If I start seeing that, then my anger begins to lose justification. So the anger, which is an elemental, is not you. This anger, the elemental, begins to feel that you are not feeding it, that you are not being identified with it, and feed the anger. And it will ask you to feed it. And it will try to say, no, that is wrong. You shouldn't think that way. It is important, as Leadbeater says, to be able to see all sides. And then when we see all sides, we can come to solutions that are real. Because when we are biased, when we see only one side, any solution we will come to will be faulty. Any solution we come to will be unable to recognize other aspects of reality. And Ibezan used to say, you should always listen to people who think differently from you and try to see in what points they may be right. Or even if you, it's not that you have to agree, you have to understand their point of view. And you may say, I understand why they are saying this. I differ in what the solution is. They may say that this is a problem and this is the solution. I understand that, but to me, that solution is not going to work. We need to be able to do this. Most people perhaps don't have the confidence that they can see things clearly, and they are not used to pondering over what happens in the world. So they just want simple messages. Tell me what I should think, what I should believe, how I should react. And perhaps it's inevitable for certain portion of humanity at this point in evolution. But those who want to do something more than that have the responsibility to be able to listen to the other side. Find a podcast or find an e-newsletter from an organization that belongs to the other side, and listen to that, read that, and be critical in the real sense of criticism. Try to understand where they are coming from, recognize things that make sense, and also say, you can say why you don't agree with this or with that. And this is something that is very helpful. And it's a bridge. Unless we start doing this, the epidemics of hatred, of intolerance, of violence always ends in widespread suffering. And nobody wants that. Now, Leadbeater says, happily, all this is true of good thought as well as of evil. And the man who realizes this may set himself to work to be a veritable sun, constantly radiating upon all his neighbors thoughts of love and calm and peace. This is a truly magnificent power, yet it is within the reach of every human being, of the poorest as well as the wealthiest, of the little child as well as the great sage. So here, because of this law works for any kind of thoughts, then we can become no, it doesn't matter if we don't have political power, if we don't have degrees, if we don't have influence on other people on the external plane. We are always influencing the world with our inner activity. So we can become, imagine looking at people from the point of view with with lenses that allow you to see their feelings and their thoughts. And imagine each person as a vortex producing a certain kind of energy. Energy of one color being, bad energy, energy of other color being, let's say, green being good, positive, and I don't know, orange being negative. So imagine what kind of entity you are, what kind of energy you are producing. And then look around the world. What kind of colors are being produced in a protest, for example? A protest that is done with a sense of compassion and justice, and the sense of we want people not to suffer, and a protest that is done through hate and violence and wanting to destroy the other. Look at how we interact on social media. Imagine all these people around the world trying to, even if dealing with difficult subjects, doing it from the point of view of trying to understand, trying to help each other, trying to find solutions. And look at the masses of people who engage just in fighting, in hating the other, in telling the others they are wrong. So if you do a little meditation and try to visualize this can help you see how important it is that those who feel that these teachings make sense, and those who feel that it is important to try to promote peace and compassion, that these people begin to pay attention not only to their actions, but also to their thoughts and emotions. Now, Blavatsky says, talking about these epidemics, the collective character of these mental epidemics is illustrated by an anomalous psychological condition invading and dominating over thousands upon thousands, depriving them of everything but automatic action. We see this, unfortunately, a lot. The idea of this automatic action. When people are under the effects of this mental epidemic, there is an immediate reaction. There is the inability to see context, to see who is talking, to see intentions. You say certain words and there will be an immediate reaction. You see certain signs and there will be an immediate reaction. Blavatsky explains that regular words and she says political slogans act as mantras. They are actually a piece of magic. So she says politicians generate these slogans, and not only politicians, we all know the power of the slogans. And she says those slogans become charged with this kind of elemental energy, so that whenever somebody listens to that slogan, there is all this current of thought connected to that slogan that comes to the mind of the person. And unless the person is really trying to work to have inner freedom, to be able to be aware, to be able to decide what the right action is, unless the person is actively working on this, there will be an immediate reaction. You say a word, there is a reaction, or there is a sign that is associated to something, there is an immediate reaction. Part of the work of people interested in these teachings is not to let ourselves fall in this unconscious reaction. So Leadbeater says, to stand against a strong popular bias, and all these slogans or ideas are part of the popular bias, is no easy matter. And the student of occultism will at once see why this is so. The whole atmosphere is full of thought forms and currents of thoughts, And these are ceaselessly acting and reacting upon every one of us. The tendency of any thought form is to influence every mental and astral body, astral or emotional body, with which it comes into contact in the direction of the same vibration. So we already talked about this, but the point here is that there is a strong current or force or pressure upon us to think in certain ways and to react automatically in those ways. We need to start working on being aware, on learning how not to engage with certain thoughts and emotions, on purifying our nature so that they are less receptive to those kind of thoughts and emotions. There is a lot of practical information in theosophical literature for this, because otherwise we just become part of the problem. So he says, we must not be swept away in any such maelstrom of popular feeling, but we must try to see where it is wrong and do what we can to put it right. Many people who are under the influence of that sensation of tremendous passion think of us rather apathetic and cold. It's if you are not reacting in the same way, if you are not saying the same words, if you are not, doing the same actions, then you don't care. Then you belong to the other side. Then you are against us. This is fairly common, unfortunately. He says it is even possible that they sometimes think of us as lacking in patriotism or whatever the cause that they are fighting for is, if we refuse to hate. Of course, that is not logical, Leadbeater said, but then people are not logical when under the influence of these great waves of hatred. So where are you standing? Or where am I standing? When I ask these questions, I'm not asking you, this is something in which we all are involved. Where are we standing? Can we start working on this and try not to fall, again, gradually, little by little, not to fall in these automatic reactions? Leadbeater says this is not easy also because we shall find ourselves in many ways differing from the majority, because the opinions of the majority are often unjust or ill-conceived, unreliable. But that, after all, we must expect, for we are setting before us a high ideal, which as yet does not appeal to the majority. So you have to be ready to differ from the majority. You may agree in sentiment with many things, but your words will be different, your actions may be different. Now, this is not a call not to act. We are talking about our inner activity. We can be very active externally, active in the political arena, in the social environment, in activism. The question is, where are we coming from? What are we producing? And Ibesan used to say she was a great activist. She produced changes in England and in India that were amazing. But she would always say, you should never fight evil. You should always encourage good. When you are fighting evil, you are engaging in the hatred side of feelings. What you have to do is to learn how to promote the good actively. You can do demonstrations, you can do strikes, but how are you doing it? Where are you aiming at? How are you trying to produce the change? Or you may not be the kind of personality that is engaged in external action. Still, you have a very fruitful field of inner action by means of your everyday thoughts and emotions, and also all you can do in meditation. So Leadbeater says, another point worth remembering is that this great clumsy force of public opinion can itself be slowly and gradually molded and influenced. We ourselves are members of the public, and under the universal law, our views must to some extent affect others. So if we continue to speak, to write, and above all, to think sanely and rationally about these questions, we will be pouring out vibrations, and their effect will be plainly visible in the great modification of the thought of our day. So let us end with this positive note that we can begin to influence public opinion by means of producing all these kind of good thoughts, thinking about this, discussing it, doing things, always from the side of love, as I was explaining. So these are some of the thoughts that I wanted to share with you. I hope I'm not trying to convince anybody. I just hope that this gives you some food for thought and ponder over these important questions.